Hi everyone, welcome back to Dad Drinks, daddrinks.com. I'm Dad, and tonight we are talking about hockey. Hockey season opens up on October 8th with the Florida Panthers defending their Stanley Cup win and their Stanley Cup championship. So what I wanted to do tonight was I was going to make a drink called the French Canadien and then talk about how hockey has kind of formed my life. Because I started playing hockey for a youth team back when I was like 8 years old, and just there have been a lot of things that have happened in hockey that have always been like iconic events that have kind of been things that I've been happy to be part of or to have seen. But first off, as always, you can't tell the story until you pour the drink. So let's pour the drink, and like I said, it is the French Canadien. So we're going to take a mixing glass, fill it up with ice. First thing we're going to get is 1 ounce of gin. I'm going to use Ryan Reynolds' favorite gin because he owns the company, and that would be Aviation. So we're going to do 1 ounce of that. Into the mixing thing. Cognac. We're going to do 2 ounces of cognac. Then, because we're in the Pacific, because we're in Canada, of course, you got to do some maple syrup. And basically it's going to be half an ounce of maple syrup. So get all that in there. And then half an ounce of lemon juice. Let's get that out. There we go. Oh, that's a little bit short. Okay, there we go. Half an ounce of lemon juice. And then 1 shake, 1 spritz, 1 dash of Angostura bitters. Grab your Dad Drinks mixing glass. You can get that on daddrinks.com with all the other merch. Shake it out. I just put it over in this glass because the strainer fits a lot better on that. And then we're going to get fancy. We're going to put it in a coupe glass. So cheers to the habitants, which is the Canadians in French. That's not bad. This is the first time I've ever had this. Found this on the web, and basically by Googling for it, because I said I want to do something about hockey. So what is it about hockey? The thing is, I grew up in New England, in Connecticut. When I was a kid, hockey was not a big thing. It's not like there were a bunch of high schools that had hockey. There were a bunch of prep schools. In fact, we played hockey at a lot of these prep schools' rinks. And when I was a kid back in the early 80s and I played hockey, we played outside, which is interesting because my children all then decided, well, not my youngest daughter, my other 2 children decided they were going to play hockey, and they'd go play hockey, and they'd be playing in these nice, new, modern rinks, and I'd go, you don't know. You have no idea what it was like to play outside when it was 25 degrees and the wind chill was minus 15. But that's how I started. I played hockey basically from the time I was 8 until about, I want to say like 14. I was not very good, honestly. I think in that entire 6 years, I may have scored 1 goal, and that was like an empty netter because it was at the end of the game and they had pulled their goalie. I was, not a forward. I mostly played defense. I excelled, though, in hitting people, although you wouldn't think that, being as I'm like 5'6" and weigh, about 190 pounds right now. Back then, I was like, about 4 foot nothing, and probably weighed about 90 pounds. So it was not a big thing, but I enjoyed it. I really loved hockey. And there were a bunch of different things that happened as I've grown up that are all like things that have shaped my vision of hockey and the way I watch hockey and why I love the sport. And I love the sport probably more than even football. I love the sport more than college football. I am more of a diehard Bruins fan than I would say I'm a Patriots fan or even a University of Alabama fan. So the first thing that really shaped my hockey fandom, and I think this is true for a lot of people, was back in 1980, and it's the U.S. hockey team, beating the Soviets. I mean, we had spent years and years and years, and the Soviets had just been this juggernaut. And we had just, the last time the United States before 1980 had won a gold medal was in 1960 in Squaw Valley. And then the interesting thing, of course, if anyone knows the history behind that, is that the coach for the 1980 hockey team was Herb Brooks. Herb Brooks was the last guy who was cut from the 1960 gold medal winning team. So that whole thing in 1980, that whole winning that gold probably meant much more to him than anybody else. And if you can sit down and watch Miracle and watch Kurt Russell as Herb Brooks give that speech right before the Soviet game, where he basically tells them they're not going to win tonight, this is your time, we're going to skate with them, we're going to beat them, and we're going to win, and not tear up and not be like, oh my God, that was a huge moment and that was a number one motivational speech. I don't know who you are. I mean, I just honestly don't. And the whole thing is, when you talk to guys from that team, from the 1980 hockey team, they're full on that's exactly what Herb said. When they went into that locker room before that game, that's what he told them. And the interesting thing is, and you have to watch after they win the game in Miracle, and I don't think a lot of people realized this back in 1980. Our whole focus was, we got to beat the Soviets, we got to beat the Soviets, we got to beat the Soviets. And no one really realized, I don't think anyone at that time understood the fact that that wasn't the gold medal game. That was basically a qualifying game to get to the gold medal game. And because of the way they did the hockey tournament in the Olympics back at Lake Placid, the Americans basically had to beat, I believe it's Finland, in the gold medal game after winning the game against the Soviets, because if they didn't, they went home with nothing. They didn't get a silver, they didn't get a bronze, they went home with nothing because of their record and the fact that the record was what determined what you were going to get for a gold medal. And if they didn't beat Finland 2 days later after they beat the Soviets, they would have gone home with nothing. But of course, as Herbie tells you, as Kurt Russell tells you at the end of Miracle, my boys went out there and just like always, they fell behind, came from behind, and won the game. So they win that Olympic game. They win the gold medal. And that was huge, I think, just for hockey in general in the United States. I think that led to a lot of places where all of a sudden where hockey wasn't a hotbed, like outside of New England, outside of the Boston area, outside of, like the Midwest, Minnesota, Michigan, those areas, where after that, all of a sudden hockey started popping up. And if you look at it, that's when the NHL actually started really focusing in on expanding teams in the United States and, moving into areas that maybe they shouldn't have moved into, like Arizona, that failed experiment, or, Atlanta that has had 2 teams. And now actually they're talking about expanding and giving them a 3rd team. But that was the catalyst for that. And then the next thing that comes into my mind and the next really seminal moment was 1994. And in 1994, the Rangers had not won a cup in something like 54 years. The mighty New York Rangers, playing at the holy grail of indoor sports arenas, Madison Square Garden, had not won a cup in a long time. They were an original 6 team, along with the Canadiens, the Maple Leafs, the Bruins, the Chicago Blackhawks, the New York Rangers, and the Detroit Red Wings. Those were the original 16 teams in the NHL, and the Rangers hadn't won a cup since 1954. And in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals, they're like facing elimination. And Mark Messier, who had come over from Edmonton, from the Oilers, and had been hired, had been signed to a contract for the Rangers, essentially because the Rangers wanted a cup. James Dolan, who owns Madison Square Garden, who owns Madison Square Garden Network, wanted a cup. He brought over Messier, and Messier going into Game 6 basically does the Joe Namath and says, we're going to win. And if we win this one, we're going to win the cup. And of course, he goes on to it. And anytime now where you see the montage of guys raising the cup, Messier's always there, raising the cup in Madison Square Garden after winning the cup for the Rangers. So that was a big, huge moment. I think the next one after that was 2 years after that. And what happened was in the summer, the NHL decided, now at this point they had already decided that they were going to start sending, and they had already been sending professionals to the Olympics. But the NHL, Gary Bettman, decided that wasn't enough. And what we needed to have was during the summer of 1996 was a World Cup of Hockey, where all these teams are going to play each other, all these countries are going to play each other. We're really going to find out who was the best. Is it the Europeans in one of those countries? Was it the Canadians? I mean, the Canadians figured they were the best. They were the top, and they were going to be the number one seed. Was it the U.S.? Was it the Russians? Who was it? And we get to a final, and the final game's best 2 out of 3, U.S. versus Canada. And watching that Game 3 with the rubber match, with everything on the line, and seeing the Americans just come through, and guys like Brett Hull and Tony Amonte just score goals and bring home the World Cup, that was huge. And then there was, and honestly right now, because I don't have my notes in front of me, I can't remember what it was, Ray Bourque winning the cup for Colorado. Ray Bourque had suffered for so long in Boston. He had been with the Bruins. They brought him up as a rookie. He was their captain. He was their, he challenged, Bobby Orr as being one of the best defensemen the Bruins ever had. And obviously, to me, that's a 1 versus 1A comparison. And then finally, the Bruins decided to do the right thing for Ray and trade him at the trade deadline that year and send him off to Colorado. And Colorado went into that with this mission 16W, because that's what you need to win the cup now. You need 16 wins, right? You got to win 4 games in each one of the series, and that comes out to 16. And it just so, it's interesting because I believe that's actually the exit for the Meadowlands, which is where the Devils used to play. It's exit 16W off the New Jersey Turnpike. But that was their whole mantra, was they were going to get 16 wins. And they wanted to get 16 wins for Ray so that they could get Ray Bourque his cup. And this is the thing I remember. What I remember about that is on that Game 7 for the Stanley Cup playoffs, the day before that, I drove from my home in New England, and I went a whitewater rafting trip out to New York. And we rafted all day, the day of that game. And then everyone was like, well, no, you got to stay. You're going to be too exhausted. I said, nope, I need to get home. I need to get off the river. And as soon as we get off the river, I need to do whatever I need to do, get in the car, and I am heading home. And I missed the first period, but I listened to it on the radio heading home. And I got home in time to watch the last 2 periods, and then, of course, to see after Joe Sakic, because the captain's always the first one who raises the cup. Joe Sakic, then the next guy he called up there is Ray, and Ray finally got to raise the cup and got to be a Stanley Cup winner. But then, of course, 2011 comes along, and I get to see my beloved, my top fan base, my guys, the Boston Bruins, finally go out there and win a cup. I had watched them be in the Stanley Cup playoffs and have to play against a loaded Edmonton team and have Edmonton shut them down. That was one year where the power went out at the Garden, and luckily they weren't playing in the Garden anymore. They got to move up. They got a new arena. They got to play in the TD Bank Center, and they go out there. And it was tough. It wasn't an easy series. Vancouver did not lay down and let them just win. But after they, took Nathan Horton out of a game and basically ended his career with a concussion, the Bruins rallied behind that and said, "That's the end of it. We're going out there and we're winning this cup." And they went out there, and to watch Daniel Chara raise that cup over his head, being that he's already 6'9", 6'10", standing on skates, and then raising that cup over his head was just one of the best things I have ever been able to see. I wish that would have happened again in the 2023 when those guys went out and they won the President's Trophy, and they basically set new records for points in a season, for wins in a season, for everything, and went out there and then against the Florida Panthers in the first round. Although it's interesting, if you turn around and you look at it, President's Trophies winners usually don't go on to win the cup. It's very rare. But those are all the things. I mean, I have seen so many wonderful things in watching hockey, and it's great. I mean, I was not around for the 4 cups that the Islanders won in the 70s, but then I was around for when they, basically handed off that legacy of a dynasty to the Edmonton Oilers. And that's one thing in reading, because I read things about, hockey players and hockey teams. And in reading Gretzky's autobiography, the way he talks about how that first series, which was the last of 4 that the Islanders won, and he talks about being in that and how those guys in Edmonton were all so young and they just didn't understand what a grind that is to go out there and have to win, 4 Stanley Cups. When you think about it, winning 4 Stanley Cups, by the time you get to that 4th one, you basically played an entire other season. So everybody else may have only played 4 seasons of hockey. You guys on that team have played 5. And he talks about walking past their locker room and looking into their locker room, the Islanders' locker room, and just seeing these guys who just looked old, and they looked injured, and they had cuts, and they had bruises, and they were icing down everything. And he walked back to the locker room for the Oilers, and at that point he knew they weren't winning that series, and that they had to change their whole mindset, because they all just were happy to be there. They were happy that they had made the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they didn't realize what a battle it is. And that's one of the things I think mostly I love about hockey, is the fact that in hockey, you don't find the same guys who play soccer. The guys who go down because someone brushed past them and then act like, they've been shot. You get a guy who plays hockey, Zdeno Chara, in the last season he played with the Bruins, when they went to the Stanley Cup and he against the St. Louis Blues, and he broke his jaw, I think in Game 4, missed Game 5, and then came out for 6 and 7. You don't see that in other sports. I mean, maybe somewhat in football. You really don't see it in anything else. And those guys, I don't like to throw around the word warrior, because we live in the South, and there's a lot of Army and Marine bases around here, and those guys are really the warriors. But to do that and to basically just put that all on the line for your teammates is just amazing. And I think, that's one of the main reasons why I just love that game. So let's have a French Canadien. Let's not root for the Canadians, because, they're the Canadians. But the hockey opens up October 8th. Triple header. I know one game is Florida, because the Stanley Cup champion always gets the first game. They're going to raise the banner. Who would ever thought that? Florida Panthers, hockey in Florida. But hopefully I'm going to get down there in December. Going to get myself a game at Amarant Arena. Going to get myself a game hopefully in Tampa at Amalie. See the Lightning, and then make my way around the country. See every game in every arena, except TD Bank, because I've already been there. But cheers, have a good time. Remember, like, subscribe, head over to daddrinks.com. You'll get the recipe over there. You can also buy some merch, and we'll see you again next week. Please hit like and subscribe, and visit daddrinks.com for recipes, merchandise, and more fun stuff.